My Lords, the Government, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister keep talking about growth. But to do that, the private sector has to be supported to grow. It's the private sector that creates the jobs, that pay for the taxes, that pay for the public services. No growth, no taxes. And if you put up taxes by £40 billion, you get no growth. That's the paradox. Tax on employment generates £455 billion. That's 45% of total public sector receipts. But high employment taxes can discourage firms from hiring. And on top of that, you have the previous government, I'm sorry to say, to be blamed for raising taxes to their highest level in 70 years. I implored Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor, when I was President of CBI, don't put up taxes. What did he do when he became Prime Minister? Put corporation tax up from 19% to 25%. Higher taxation is associated with reduced labour supply. Studies show that a 1% rise in tax correlates to a 0.5% drop in hours worked, and studies indicate that higher labour taxes increase unemployment levels. The Labour Party has promised no increases in certain taxes. That's all very well. But, for example, removing the non-dom regime, that is going to have a hugely detrimental effect. 75,000 people who pay £9 billion of tax a year, they invest in this country, they spend in this country. These people are mobile. That money will fly. And what about IR35? No mention of that. Maybe the noble Lord, the Minister, could say why not. GDP per person in the quarter of 2024, second quarter, was 0.6% lower than before the pandemic. Public sector net debt is now almost 100% of GDP. That's 4% higher than a year ago and last levels seen in the early 1960s. And according to the IFS, as a share of GDP, the rise in taxation by the end of this decade will be the second largest of any post-war fiscal event. The tax take is forecast to increase to a peacetime record of 38% of GDP. My Lords, the inheritance tax relief being removed in terms of an increase of 20% tax now for business relief, agricultural relief, and AIM shares and pensions. This is so harmful, particularly for farmers. I don't think this has been thought through. 70% of farmers will be hit by this. Will they be able to sell their land to be able to pay the tax? Or if they don't own the land as tenants, they can't even do that. How do you value businesses? How do you sell? This is, I think, going to be a disastrous move. And as for the VAT on private schools, £1.3 billion is forecast to be raised. In the debates we've had before, we've demonstrated it will probably cost the government £1.6 billion with a higher burden on the state sector and a drop in international borders. This is a penny-wise and pound-foolish move. Total public spending is forecast to settle at 44.5% of GDP by the end of the decade. That's almost 5% higher than before the pandemic. And this is not good news, although I do think the government is doing the right thing with the blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal. The OBR has forecasted real household disposable income per person to grow at just over 0.5% a year on average for the next 5 years. That's the joint lowest on record. And my Lords, for many businesses, there was an article in the Telegraph today, the biggest shock wasn't the rate increase, but a near halving of the threshold at which they have to start paying national insurance, 9,100 to 5,000. The hospitality industry has warned that this change will cost over £1 billion. Taken together, the changes mean that a company employing a part-time worker doing 15 hours work a week will see their national insurance contribution bill increase by 73%. My Lords, this is really ridiculously high. Kate Nichols, the Chief Executive of UK Hospitality, describes this increase in cost as eye-watering and warns it disproportionately hits companies in her sector, given many employ part-time staff in roles such as waiting and bartending. And my Lords, whenever you get a significant cost increase, what do you do as a business? You can either put up your prices, or you can reduce your costs, or you can stop investing. My Lords, the OBR has warned that all the measures in this budget will lead to low growth looking ahead. Highest will be 2%, mostly just over 1%, and inflation is going to go up. Businesses are bearing the brunt of the £40 billion tax increase, and business rates, the relief of 75% is going down to 40%. How are pubs going to manage? How are restaurants going to manage? How is the high street going to manage? And on top of all this, we have a £5 billion cost on the impact of employment regulation. We have one of the most flexible labour markets in the world. That's a huge advantage. That is now being eroded. So, my Lords, I conclude that in 16 years, financial crisis, austerity, Brexit, pandemic, Ukraine war, inflation of 11%, energy inflation, cost of living crisis, 7th of October, the tragedy after that, the uncertainty that you look at it every way that you look, how much more can business deal with? How resilient can our businesses be? This, my lords, is not a pro-business budget or a pro-entrepreneurship budget. It's government's job to be a catalyst and create the environment for businesses and entrepreneurship to flourish and grow. I'm sorry, this budget does exactly the opposite. And I'm afraid to say, I warn the government, this budget is going to come back like a boomerang and bite us.